Hi, I'm Scott. Welcome to Synth Stuff. Today we're going to be talking all about Korg. We have the opsix, the Wavestate, the ModWave, which I don't have here, and what's in the future for them. Coming up. There's a specific reason why we're talking about Korg this week, and that's because last week I was on the Senior Synth Channel show with JX3D or Henrick. We had Marc Barnes, who is from Scotland, who has created many Wavestate sound sets, and of course myself, but we also had Dan Phillips, who is the public face of Korg for the Wavestate. He is the god of Wavestate, one of the main creators and founders behind the project, and a really nice guy. So we got to talk to him for almost 3 hours, got some really juicy information that I want to share with you about what may or may not be coming up, and so you don't have to watch that 3-hour show. I mean, I will put a link to it in the description below if you want to watch the whole 3-hour show. And it was a fun show. It was entertaining and we got a lot of information out. However, what I'm going to talk about here specifically related to the Wavestate, the opsix, the ModWave, and the Wavestate SE. One of the first topics that came up was chip shortages. We know all the manufacturers have had major problems with supply chain and electronic parts. The Wavestate and opsix form factor of synths all run on Raspberry Pi Compute 3 modules, and they were in scarce supply, including for Korg. He said they didn't even get any for over a year. So here's what Dan had to say about that.
Is that line limited by the future availability of that compute module?
Compute modules are, our production has been limited for the last year and a half while the CM3 series was not very available. And they were struggling with a lot of things. We talked to some people at the RPi Foundation and RPi Trading, or the commercial wing of the RPi Foundation. They were doing all they could. They weren't getting the people who make the chips for them were not getting the wafers that they needed to make those chips. But what we're seeing now is right now the resumption of shipping of those all of the RPi chips, and so I think that we'll be able to make more soon.
Many people may have noticed that on Sweetwater, the Wavestate showed up as discontinued a few weeks ago, so I asked Dan directly, is the Wavestate discontinued?
I did notice that Sweetwater now has the Wavestate listed as discontinued.
Mm-hmm.
Is it actually discontinued?
Wavestation is not discontinued, but I think that they can't get any right now.
Okay. I've seen Sweetwater do that before, list something as discontinued just because they can't get it. I've seen other retailers do it. I think Thomann, I've seen it do it as well.
It's a completely reasonable thing to do on their part. So, but we have lots up our sleeve.
Yep. I know you're not allowed to say things.
And of course, the one big question that keeps getting asked, I had so many people, when they found out that I was going to be talking to Dan on this show, they said, please ask him this question. So I did. What happened to the Wavestate SE? If you remember, the Wavestate SE was announced at NAMM, I think it was 2020, maybe 2019, I think it was 2020, and it was a large, either 49 or 61 key version of the Wavestate, but it had channel Aftertouch, with a metal case, so more for performing. But after that, it was kind of radio silence, and we never heard anything. And because it's just gone years with no mention after that initial rollout of the prototype, everybody kind of assumed that, oh, okay, well, it's never going to happen. So I asked Dan, what happened to the Wavestate SE?
The big elephant in the room that I've actually had several people ask me to say, make sure you ask him, what happened to the Wavestate SE?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm looking at a prototype right now, but that's still in the plans.
So it's not dead?
Not dead.
Okay, that's good to know.
So that's great news. The Wavestate SE is coming. We're going to be seeing it at some point in the future. No idea on a price point, but it is definitely going to be coming. And that means that all the factory patches that currently ship with the Wavestate will be modified so that you can actually use them with the Aftertouch that is supplied by the Wavestate SE. That's great because other keyboards, when you're playing it with another keyboard that may have Aftertouch capability, you can get that effect in the Wavestate because those patches will now respond to Aftertouch. Let's see what he had to say about that.
I'll tell you what I have been looking forward to, because the SE has, I want to say channel Aftertouch, not poly Aftertouch.
It has channel Aftertouch, yeah.
Channel Aftertouch is a reworking of the factory patches to actually act upon that Aftertouch. Because I do have patches that I've done myself, because the Wavestate will receive either channel and poly Aftertouch. But to have a reworking of samples or performances that actually that receive and act on that would be fantastic. Just another level of expression.
And of course, Dan couldn't pass up mentioning the Aftertouch source in Wavestate Native, and I believe it's the same for opsix Native and ModWave Native, which is the VST, the plug-in version of the synthesizers, that you can modify the Aftertouch source.
It's I'm not sure if you guys are using the the Wavestate Native plugin.
Oh yeah.
But you can see something in there which is sort of interesting. In the if you go to the settings for Wavestate Native, you'll see something called Aftertouch Source. Yeah, right there. So if you click on that, so the cool thing about this is that it takes any Aftertouch. So as you say, for a very long time, actually, we supported poly Aftertouch. I think probably the Wave Station supported poly Aftertouch input, which it's probably not coincidental that a bunch of the guys were from Insonic, so who of course were into poly Aftertouch. That little parameter is pretty neat, and what it does is anything that you have as an Aftertouch source, you can automatically reroute poly Aftertouch to those sources in a polyphonic way. So as long as the destination is per voice, something that's happening per voice, like any of the wave sequencing parameters, for instance, you just select poly Aftertouch there, send it poly Aftertouch, and now all of a sudden you can play the thing polyphonically.
Right.
And that's pretty neat. So that's something that we've been thinking about, and I think it'd be reasonable to assume that if we just recently added that to the plugin, that we've been thinking about Aftertouch and our sounds too.
And you would not be the only one. It seems to be that multiple manufacturers are getting on poly Aftertouch bandwagon. I know of a couple others coming that haven't been announced as well.
Yeah, I think it's exciting.
I wanted to talk to Dan briefly about the paradigm behind the UI design with the controls on the Wavestate. I have some issues. I mean, it's fairly well laid out, but there is a ton of functionality that has to go in there. So this is what I asked.
I have to say, I was so thrilled with Wavestate Native, because my singular frustration with the Wavestate is the UI. Not that it's a terrible UI, but it's just that there's so much that you have, and obviously you have to have a balance between controls and cost, and I mean, the balance better than I would, but you can only have so many controls, because if you throw a kitchen sink knob per function, all of a sudden your synthesizer is $3,000 and nobody buys it. So, I mean, it's a really clever way that you've done things, but it does make several things layers in that I know Mark he's done far more programming than I have on the Wavestate, but it wasn't until the Wavestate Native came out, everything is just splashed on the screen in front of you, so you can see every parameter. Right. That I really started doing a lot more Wavestates to sound design, because it was you can see what's happening right in front of you without going through menus and so on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the whole Wavestate design was very interesting to me, because on the one hand, it's a really maximalist synthesizer already, right? There's a whole lot going on inside it, and yet the way I describe it to people, we have this underlying software system, and for all the complexity that you see there, that's actually exposed, there's a whole lot underneath that's not exposed, and it's like it's as if you took Keith Emerson's Moog modular setup and wired it up to emulate a mini Moog functionality, and then sprayed it with epoxy. That's like what the Wavestate is, so there are a bunch of things. Someone in Gearspace was recently recently asking about more complex envelopes, and we actually have more complex envelopes under the hood if we wanted to use them, but it's really hard to map those to knobs.
Yeah.
And there are ways of doing it that work okay, but I really wanted something which would just give you simple ADSR controls. And once you start adding more segments, they don't work very well. And so there were many places where we deliberately said, okay, we're going to make this simpler now so that it can be controlled easily from a front panel. And as you say, things like wave sequencing, that it's really, at least maybe someone will come up with a way, but for us, it's, it was very difficult to map real hands-on control to individual sequences. And so what we did instead was to map hands-on control to the lane controls, which I think is exploited to some extent, depending on the sounds. My sounds for it, I'll kind of think about things from the perspective of lanes and kind of more of an aleatoric synthesis process.
We did get into a discussion about patch storage on the Wavestate and opsix and ModWave, which is done differently than a lot of other synths. There's no concept of bank and patch number. You can have literally thousands and thousands of patches in there, and they can access each other's resources, but they will actually make copies, not references. And Dan goes on to describe that here.
We wanted to fix a couple of things with the way that sounds were organized, and one of them was not having at least much in the way of external reliances. So what you just described, right, is the way that the wave station works, right? So you've got programs and patches and wave sequences, and all of those have to be in the right place in order for the sound to be correct. And so what you would do is you would kind of deliver a bank which had all of its internal relationships set, and you could have relationships to ROM too, but if you stepped outside of that, it was very easy to break things. And so with the Wavestate and the ModWave, there are actually individual objects in there. So you have performances and programs and effects presets and motion sequences and wave sequences and motion sequence and wave sequence lanes and various other things going, chaos physics presets. So you can select these things, right?
Which is very handy. I have to say that.
Oh, cool. But once you select them, that becomes part of the performance. The performance no longer cares about what the actual thing was. It's been sucked in, like a DAW or a desktop publishing program, right? So
Copy rather than reference.
So yes, exactly. And we maintain the reference so that you can kind of see where it came from. But after that, everything.
You're not actually using that when it becomes like its own entity. But at the minute, it becomes part of a performance.
That drives me insane about Roland. Like the System 8 is a perfect example. You can create performances which are bitimbral splits and layers, but they're actually referencing single tones. So if you go into a patch and change to single tone, you've screwed up any performances that are linked to it.
So Marc came right out and said it. What's coming in the future for the Raspberry Pi series of synthesizers from Korg?
So Dan, I take it as, so obviously there was an issue with getting Raspberry Pis but are we going to sort of continue this line of sort of Raspberry Pi synths? Is there more to come?
That is my sincere hope.
Good. Because the thing is, I do love getting them. There's a lot going for them for someone like me. Okay, so for starters, there's a price point which is great. So, I mean, there's some synths that I could go and buy and they're amazing, but it would take maybe about 4 years to recruit the money for them to buy.
And I have to compliment Dan on his masterful ability at providing non-committal answers to future products.
I hate it.
I do get that. Obviously, we live in a world where NDAs rule.
Yeah, I mean, Mark, I know you've worked with companies, and I have as well with other synth companies, and you have to sign the NDAs, and you can't say anything, and sometimes it kills you. And you're posting and saying, "Hey, here's what I think is going to happen." I'm like, "No, you're wrong."
I know. I remember when I was beta testing the Wavestate 2.0 for you, and I was loving it.
Yeah,
I was putting together some stuff, and I was putting videos out of me playing, but I wasn't telling anybody that I didn't put samples in, and then I would see Facebook groups and people saying stuff, and I'm like, you're gonna look like a right idiot when you see what Korg do with this Wavestate, and you can't say, and you're like desperate to almost sort of grab the person by the throat and say, this is what's gonna happen. But no, I get that there's only so much you can say.
I asked Dan about the module versions. I know that many people wanted a module version of these synthesizers with just the synthesizer without the key bed.
I would ask what Dan thinks of, because I know there's been a lot of people requesting module or desktop versions of keyboardless versions, to the point now where even I think there's an aftermarket provider who has started manufacturing cases where you can take the front panel with the compute module without the keyboard and plop it in a case and use it as a module.
Yep.
I don't know why I'm going to ask. Is Korg ever thinking of doing that? Why am I even bothering to ask that?
So, I mean, the first thing I'll say is, we the whole issue of form factor was very interesting. So, I mean, I talk to people about developing products, and there are a whole bunch of people who were involved with these products. This is not a solo operation, and I'm not the manager of our group either. I have the only influence that I have is earned influence.
But you are the public face, like it or not. You've made that.
That's just happened.
Yeah.
So, my title now is manager of product development. So, for this line of products, I was the point guy for kind of figuring out what we should make and what it should be. The wave sequencing 2.0 thing, was initially my idea, and then many people contributed to it. We have a great tight group of people at Korg R&D working on software and also kind of managing the sound development, and then a bunch of people in Japan working on small things like the hardware, and actually building the devices. So there's so many people who are involved in making these things a success. With the Wavestate, you have to think of something that would be exciting. I think of something that would be exciting for me to use, and then figure out something that I can get my group excited about. And then kind of as that core of excitement builds, you get the people, the manufacturing excited about it, people who are in sales excited about it, and kind of figure out what you can do that everyone's going to pull behind. And that was the process that led to the Wavestate and then opsix and ModWave.
I kept pressing Dan about the future of Korg or what's coming up. Let's see what he has to say about the future of Korg synths.
It has been a horrible time, I will say, for people making hardware the last several years. And we're very lucky to have not been overly affected by that with products that we've actually, started to ship. But we certainly have been affected by it. And so that's one of the things is that, we had all sorts of ideas for this line that have been delayed because, we couldn't build the ones we were already, we'd already announced and we'd already started shipping. There was a very long gap where we didn't get any CM3s, like well over a year.
Wow.
And so when that's going on, you don't want to pile up a whole bunch of new hardware plans because
Absolutely.
there's no point.
So with all the capital invested in that compute module platform and the underlying UI, I assume is some sort of operating system that you then have the synth modules on top of. Is that looking to the future to extend that and place other synths on top of that infrastructure?
Well, so I think we've talked about this. So it's they're based on Linux, and it's to a certain degree an evolution of the Kronos platform. There were a couple of instruments, the Grand Stage and the Vox Continental, that started using this basic system, although they were using it on different hardware. And again, we try to be hardware agnostic about this stuff, and just try to use what's best when you're making it. And you can see that those are multiple synthesizer modules, or multiple synthesizer model instruments. And then the current CM3 products, the Wavestate opsix ModWave, are also using that. In those cases, again, primarily because of wanting to make things easily understandable from a front panel. They're only single model instruments. But yes, that the underlying software is similar in structure to that of the Grand Stage and the Vox Continental. And so we have it's an application, but it is.
What I ask is that's a sunk cost that now you could then expand upon in the future?
Yeah, I mean it's a sunk cost, but it's also a platform that we continue to expand and maintain. So, but the main idea is to have something that can expand in the future and can work out. The same system is used as the core of the plugins as well, and the synth side of those plugins came together very quickly because of that. And again, you can see a platform agnostic philosophy there. So we now have the Wavestate is deployed on. Excuse me for coughing so much. Wavestate is deployed on the CM3 hardware, and it's deployed on Mac ARM and Mac Intel and Windows Intel, and that's all the same engine running. And yes, we're absolutely intending to continue to work with that and bringing it to new stuff.
If anyone has been watching my channel for a long time, you'll know that I put a video out some time ago where I went into a rant about the tiny screens that they put on synthesizers nowadays. So I asked Dan, why the small screens? I will put a link to that video in the description below. I asked Dan, why the small screens on these synthesizers?
Here's a design question I wondered about, and it seems like, and in fact, I think I created a video ranting about this. It seems like virtually all the synth manufacturers have stepped away from high resolution LCDs and are now using these low resolution LCDs, dot matrix, and then trying to form. And this is the Wavestate and the ModWave and opsix are a perfect example of that, where sometimes you're trying to cram fonts in and you've got like 5x7 dot matrix, 1980s dot matrix fonts. to do the letters. So is there? I mean, clearly you can get LCDs of that size that are higher resolution that are fairly inexpensive. Was that a dollar decision or was that a design decision?
In general, so I'm sorry, Henrik, what are you showing us here?
That's a Neutron with
I see. Okay.
with your buttons and keyboard.
That's funny. Yeah. So on that question, I mean, it really is about money. It's about money, reliability, and visibility. So these displays are very easy to read, much more so than
wide angle.
Yeah, much more so than So I'm in a really acute angle, and I can still read this display just fine. And this is the screen size that the Clavia Nord has been using, that Electron uses, and it's so it's a ubiquitous thing. It's inexpensive. It's very reliable, and that's basically why. I think one of the things. I mean, it was interesting to me to see synths going back to this, as you say. Their challenges. I actually manually designed all of the fonts in these things. It's one of the many hats that
I actually, just for fun, built a computer for my motorcycle a number of years ago. I did an Amtel chip, but also driving a monochrome LCD. And I did the exact same thing, designing the fonts by hand, which I hadn't done since the days of, I guess, Commodore 64s.
Right. I remember with the Wavestate SR, with Wavestation SR, we had a 2x16 display, and it was a character display, but you had some custom characters you could use, and we needed to be able to. What was the deal? I think that we had to show, from 1 to 16 for something, and so a particular challenge for me was figuring out how to do a 4 with 2 pixels of width. And yeah, this is a little bit of a return to that. I like to think that it's very legible. So the font sizes are actually very big in comparison to stuff that you'd find on your phone. I think the other thing is that phones have made it so people are used to really high quality displays, like astonishingly high quality. There's no, if any small manufacturer built this, it would be like $5,000. And,
right.
and no one would buy it. And it's very difficult to explain that to people who have just bought something that looks like, that for, $500 or $1,000.
Teenage engineering.
Yeah. And that's,
tiny mixer.
Their stuff is expensive. I hate it when people say things like, oh, that's overpriced. Like, you know what? Pretty much nothing in the free market is overpriced. There are certain things where people may be in a position where they're selling a limited availability luxury item where they can charge a lot more, where higher price actually is a motivating factor for people. But when we're building stuff, when we're building gadgets, the stuff costs what it costs. And either it does what you want it to do and you're willing to pay the price, or it doesn't and you're not. And so teenage engineering stuff is expensive. And it's very well built and it's beautiful stuff. It's not my personal aesthetic, but
neither for me. But
I'm not saying that to criticize.
Willing to pay for it, otherwise they wouldn't be building it and selling it at that price.
Yeah. Exactly. And if I guarantee you that if they could sell it for cheaper, they would, because they also have a line of much, much, much less expensive stuff, right? And so the other thing I think is a weird question of aesthetics, which is, for these instruments, I really wanted something that talked about hardware. And once you start having a colored display on these things, then all of a sudden you're having something that it's directly competing with everything that you see on your computer.
One more time, I tried to get Dan to slip up and tell us what's coming in the future for the Wavestate opsix ModWave series of synths, the Raspberry Pi based synths. So here's what he has to say.
Okay, what synths do I want Korg to release? Well, and that's an interesting question too, because I have my little group at Korg that I work with, and I want to stress again that it's a team, and it's not even my team. I'm part of that team, right?
Yeah, but it's only theoretically. I can't say it.
Yeah. What do I want? Well, no. Goodness, that's such a hard problem, and part of it is the reason that Scott talks about, right? Which is that, you know, I actually have plans for things that I can't talk about, which pains me greatly. You know, I'm working on actually more products simultaneously right now than I've ever worked on in my career at Korg.
But when you're working on products, how many of them gets released? Do you work on a lot?
Oh, you're right that occasionally there are products that we work on that get dropped, but right now the stuff that I'm working on is all for things that will almost certainly be released.
Will it be? I know you can't say it, but will it be in the same series as the same format as the Wavestate and opsix and all that?
I mean, I think I'm fairly confident saying that you know that series is something we've been working on. It's a platform that we work on, and so yes, the things that I'm working on are kind of all related to that in one way or another.
So it will evolve for years.
Yeah,
probably.
I mean, I guess the one thing I'll say is that what I want to do is to kind of continue to push things forward in communicating about these synths and the other things that, you know, I mean, I have a whole list of synths in the, you know, in the original proposal that became the Wavestate and ModWave and also opsix. We had a whole list of ideas there, and so there's a lot more to work through. I really like the idea of having synths that coexist in hardware and software. I think that's great, and I think that's important because, you know, as we're saying, people have very different workflows, and right now there is this kind of bifurcation between the hardware synths, where a lot of it is you know, physical exploration. Scott, I think you were talking about that. Just, you know, sitting in front of the thing and being part of it.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed being a part of it. I really loved getting to talk to Dan. I've conversed with him online before, but this is the first time where I've actually, you know, well, face to face over the internet. Just the nicest guy. He really loves music. He loves synthesizers. He lives this stuff. So it's nice to see that Korg's R&D, at least in California, is under his good guidance, and we're going to be seeing lots more great synths, it sounds like, from Korg in this form factor using this operating system, this Linux operating system. What do you think? Leave your comments in this comment section below. Do you have any guesses? Do you have any comments about what Dan had to say? Did he say anything that I missed? And if you have any questions, comments, complaints, please also leave that in the description below. I do read all of those comments. I hope you like this. Please click like, subscribe. It really helps me out when you do that. Thanks for watching.